Firstly, what a great turnout we have. As I said earlier, Chris obviously draws in some great numbers. Thank you all for tuning in to what promises to be a really interesting session. I'll let Chris introduce himself properly in a few moments. But this is episode 8 out of 10 now in the QAstion Time Lunch and Learn series, excuse the punny name. But it's great to be seeing some new faces still, even at this late stage of the series. For those of you who I haven't spoken with previously, my name's Christy, and I'm a quality and test consultant for Expertise Recruitment, and I place great testers with my great clients across Yorkshire and the Northwest. The idea behind the Lunch and Learn series, though, was to, I suppose, bring the test community together during these strange times and get people learning and connecting with each other. And so far, I've heard some great stories of this happening and I suppose continuing to happen even after these sessions behind the scenes, which is genuinely awesome to hear. Whilst Chris is talking, if I could ask you all to go on mute just to ensure that there's no background noise or interference, that'd be great. And as I always say, for those of you that are fully clothed and feel comfortable doing so, always great to see some cameras left on, as it's gives some visual feedback for the speakers delivering the sessions, which is really useful. We'll run through all of your questions at the end, but feel free to ask them throughout using the chat function on Zoom, just while they're fresh in your mind, or alternatively, you can just speak up at the end of the session as well. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Chris now. So Chris, take it away.
Cheers, Christy. Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll share my screen, so I might not be able to see people, but if you have a question, just stop me at any time and I can clarify what I'm talking about. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions at the end, so just feel free. So I'll share my screen and hopefully people can start to see what I can see. Just what I need. 2 seconds, let me stop that. Oh, perfect. Can people see that okay?
Yeah, all good.
Sweet. Okay, the bar at the top managed to block it off, but I managed to get around it. So we're cool. Okay, so yeah, thank you for coming to my talk. So I'll introduce myself. So I'm Chris Thacker. I'm on Twitter at ChrisThacker66. So if you want to give me any feedback, abuse, feel free and I'll go for it. You'll see at the bottom of all my slides today, so you don't need to remember it. And I'm going to say about my path to becoming an engineering leader. So to do that, it's important that I cover different types of engineering leadership. Can people see that okay, or is that in the way? Okay, I'm assuming people can see the full screen. I can see your video face. Tell me if you can't. I don't know if it moved. So I'm going to cover the different types of engineering leadership. I'm going to dive into general principles of the transformation that I've been through, and then specific examples of what I've done, as I think that'll help to bring out the kind of context and how I've applied them. Also, I'll talk about books, ideas, references that I've used in the making of this kind of, presentation. And I've got a slide at the end so that people can just take a screenshot. I'll leave it during Q&A, rather than have to take notes and write stuff down. So I suppose people are probably wondering, why should you listen to me? And I think that's a fair question. So I'm currently head of engineering at a supermarket. Before anybody asks a question or starts, I'm not in charge of any of the adverts, so I can't help you there. So as an industry in tech, I think we tend to believe that it's primarily our developer colleagues who becomes head of engineering. And I just wanted to share my path with you all so that others perhaps take up the mantle. So I've been in the industry QA since about 2007, with a stint beforehand as a developer. And I've worked at a variety of companies from both big and small, agile and waterfall. So hopefully the ideas mentioned today, they work in any context specific for me. So I talk about standing on the shoulders of the giants. It's because most of the stuff that I've written here, it's done by industry experts, and at best I've recombined it and applied it to engineering. I'm not intending to take credit for other people's ideas, so I'm attempting to give credit to people who've had the original ideas and thoughts. So hopefully people will leave, engaged and interested and go and find out some of these people, as opposed to, leaving that I've come up with some of this. That's not true if that's what you believe. So I'm a huge believer in books, and that's what I'm talking about, standing on the shoulders of giants. They take a lot of time to write, which means that you have a lot of thought. If it's going to take you a decade to write a book, you tend to make sure it's well researched and well thought through. So you're getting possibly that decade's worth of experience in about 5 hours. That isn't a slight on blogs. I think I mentioned a few blogs later on. I just believe that they can be written in haste, and in haste and in a moment, you might not have fully through what you're talking about, what you're thinking. So anyhow, let's get cracking. So First question is, what does a head of engineering do? So this is my actual probably job description. It's worth talking about how I created it. So beforehand, I was a test manager at Money Supermarket, and all I basically did was replace the word testing for technical primarily. So it was develop and implement testing strategies for products, attract, retain, develop testing engineers. It's as simple as, for me, is it's just leading a wider remit than just the testing community now. It's easy for us to start to think of ourselves as a silo, and what we tend to forget is that anything we tweak upstream or downstream can have negative effects. So I want to give a bit of an example of stepping outside of the box, and this isn't related to something that I've done, but really explain the kind of thoughts of upstream, downstream thinking.
Got anything good on the old...
I mean, there's a bit of leftover curry, or...
Of the questions or of the all the things
Hey,
out?
Jemima, I'm not sure if... she's on mute now.
Cool, perfect. Yeah, no problem. So a great example of upstream thinking. So in 2012, for every 100 customers who booked Expedia, the travel website, hotels, cars, flights, 58 of them placed a call afterwards for help. So imagine that nearly 60% of your customers need support. In 2012, roughly 20 million people were calling to receive a copy of their itinerary. That's the equivalent to everybody in London calling Expedia twice. And a support cost of roughly $5 a call, that's a $100 million problem. Now, it's obvious from a tech perspective, we're selling products, that looks great. And it's obvious from a customer service perspective that we're fixing the issues. But actually, when you look at it like that, it's win-win. But actually, when you look at it across the org, it's lose-lose. And that's what I think engineering, head of engineering is responsible for. We used to have development managers, we used to have test managers, and it was quite easily for me to do things that would have affected the development manager, vice versa. Quite easy for the development manager to think about the test manager, not think about the test manager and causes issues. I think engineering management spans across the whole piece, which allows us to give us that kind of, further up view that just benefits everyone. It's one of the reasons, that when I like to think of end-to-end metrics, see any of my talks, it always mentions accelerate. And I always talk about the kind of gold standard for me, which is code commit to lifetime, release frequency, change fail percentage, mean time to recovery. This was the kind of thinking that I had that was kind of moving me out and further away from the testing space into the head of engineering space. The main callback to think about when you're thinking about things upstream is sometimes you don't get the credit you deserve. So think of a street with a lot of accidents. Whenever there's a crash, a police officer turns up and records the incident. Because at the end of the month, with loads of paperwork, loads of issues, and they'll get a job well done. And compare that with a police officer who thinks upstream and stands on the corner. You stood there, we're all aware that happens when a police officer's around and you're driving. You tend to drive slower, you drive more carefully. But actually, at the end of that month, that police officer who's probably made a lot of accidents avoided, what have they got to show for it? They've got no paperwork, they've not done anything in the eyes of the kind of the police chief, so possibly end up in some sort of thing. So that's the kind of drawback of thinking upstream. So again, I've talked a little bit about head of engineering, what it is. I think it's about taking that kind of bird's eye look across the whole estate, not just thinking about test or development in isolation, but thinking about the whole piece. And so how did I become one? So here's my first idea, my first model, Scott Adams. So for those of you who don't know, Scott Adams is the creator of Dilbert, the cartoon. This model, the way I kind of took it and explained to me was that by layering skills, you could reach the elite as opposed to being number one in an area. So why does that matter? So, I said before in tech, I think we kind of think, an engineering manager has to be super strong engineer. That's the number one thing and nothing else matters. But actually, the way that Scott Adams described this was saying by layering things on, you can actually get into that elite. I've put here how to be in the top 1%, and I've got an applied slide in a minute. I'm not claiming that I'm in the top 1%, but I just wanted to kind of call this one out. So, let's do the maths. So if you're in a group of 1 million people and you're in the top 10%, you're in the 100K matter. If you've got 2 skills and you're in the top 10%, you're at 10,000 people. Another skill with 10%, you're at, so you're at 10,000 people. So I've lost my train of thought. You're down to 1,000, sorry. At a fourth, it's 100. Fifth, it's 10. Sixth, you're all on your own. You're in a kind of market of one. And that's the kind of thing that I thought about and thought, actually, how do I approach this in my mind? What are my skills? What are the things that I should be focusing on that I can get to the top 10% and that will allow me to leverage that? If anybody's interested, Scott Adams says his core skills are drawing, comedy. He says that most people are in the top 25% of those, and he is, and that he's worked in an office, hence the reason he's allowed to bring the Dilbert. So how does that apply to me? So on the right, I've got a diagram of what I've just explained. It's just all about the unions of the individual skills getting into what they call rarer and rarer on his blog. So the skills that I mentioned on the left, I hope I've got a lot more than that, but I just wanted to outline. I was originally a developer, and I fell into testing. 2 seconds, my phone's gone. Sorry about that. Just what I need. You don't think about these things, do you? Your computer's starting to have people phoning you and it starts taking over. That's what happens when you connect all your machines together. So sorry about that. So as a developer, I got into testing. It was 08, 09, and not many people were rocking that combination back then. So plenty of people were better developers than me. I seen Andy Lowry join on before. He will definitely back me up there. And there's plenty of people who are better testers than I am. But how many people were trying to do both? Add into the fact that I had a genuine interest in people and leadership, not just that I want to tell people what to do kind of mentality, but a belief in getting the best out of people and developing them in their careers. This allowed me to compete against people with better individual skills, no doubt, than I did, but didn't bring as many facets as that I did. Again, why is that important? This is why it's important, because no engineering manager has just one strong skill. It probably comes as no surprise that there's plenty of models around skills of any type, but this is Pat Kewer's model again. Somebody I saw at QCon this year, he's got a great blog called Level Up that I believe in. You know, there's plenty of different models, but this is just the one that I've seen and I like. And it breaks down the kind of job into 4 key areas: technical, team, process, and product. The technical skill is all about driving the code platform. Team is all about focusing on the members of the team and making it high performing. And then process is about thinking about the full end-to-end process of delivering the software. And then obviously lastly is about driving the products alongside business and marketing type of goals. When you frame it like this, you start to see that you can compensate for perceived weaknesses in other areas and actually how you can move into that without being strong at one thing. So again, I assume this is a familiar graphic for anybody who's ever played a computer game, but it's a type of skill ranking. The idea being, you know, you can kind of get 10 different stars and you can divvy them the same way. You know, nobody is great at everything. So let's talk about the elephant in the room here. A lot of testers don't code, and they sometimes wonder how this compares against their dev colleagues for some of these jobs. But look at this. 4 of the 5 types of roles that Pat's identified don't rely heavily on technical skills. And, you know, if I'm talking about head of engineering role, then I'm probably thinking more about the lead of leads engineering management type. And that's the lowest one technically. You know, at this level, you're managing tech leads who already know a lot about writing code and stuff. They're not at the level where they're going to ask you for syntax help. It's more about bouncing ideas about getting better at leading people, you know, tuning processes, teamwork. That's something as testers and, you know, just people we're all familiar with. There's also 2 other big factors about that. You talk about growth mindsets and beginner's minds, and actually how better than not having a massively technical background. It really allows you to listen in and apply critical thinking. I went on a coaching course about a year and a half ago, and, you know, as part of that, you had to do what they call real play, which was bring actual examples and discuss them and coach people. And it was so much different not having the context and coaching. It made it so much better because, you know, if someone gives me a problem, I'll generally try and give you a solution because of the assumptions and the belief that I already have. Actually, for me, you know, not knowing that and not having that is a bit of a factor we should be playing at. And then the second big factor around this is being able to grow people technically. They don't have a boss then who's trying to tell them what to do and what not to do from a technical perspective. And actually it gives them more freedom to operate. And actually that's something that really helps and grows people's momentum. So I appreciate people have heard that, and hopefully they're kind of like, yeah, that's cool, that makes sense. But there's going to be some people sitting there like, Chris, you know, I actually do want to be technical. Come on, what have you got for me? So this is what I've got for you. It's all ultra learning here. So Ultra Learning, it's a book by Scott Young. Scott Young is a guy who did a MIT degree in 1 year, a 4-year full computer science degree. Now, this isn't me suggesting I've done this. This isn't me suggesting you do this. But what I'm saying is these are his credentials. So let's just talk about some sort of like meta learner, uber learner. And in his book, he talks about 9 principles. He talks about meta learning, which is learning how to learn. So it's about getting a map of what you're trying to develop. It's about focus. That's about building the ability to concentrate. It's about directness. That's about learning the stuff that you actually want to do. So if you want to learn how to drive a car, go drive a car. You know, it makes sense. Drill. So it's about breaking down the task into complex parts and mastering them. You know, everything we do, you know, driving a car is a perfect example. You know, the steering is changing gears. There's individual parts. Retrieval is about teaching yourself to be able to retrieve the information, which is different from the next part, which is retention, which is remembering information. So storage of information and retrieving of information are separate. It talks about getting feedback, and feedback's basically how can you tell that you're getting better. If you're driving, you're not hitting cars, etc., etc. And intuition is about going to generate proper understanding. The idea being that if you really understand something, as opposed to kind of cheap memory tricks, it's going to be easy for you to recall. And then the last one is experimentation, which is getting outside your comfort zone. So the last point here about consistency over intensity, it's just to clarify that becoming 1% better every day leaves you with something that's 37 times bigger by the end of the year. So, whenever you try and improve with a little work, you could be 37 times better by this time next year. It's not a big amount of time, 1%, to become 1% better, especially if you're starting with something you've never studied. And also, again, consistency over intensity. Don't beat yourself up if you miss a day. This isn't about working days on end, not seeing your mates, just focusing on this. It's just about committing small times daily, and it'll soon add up. Okay, so what did I do? All right, so I tried to do an AWS certification. So I believe we're at a paradigm shift. We can probably talk about some of this later on again, about cloud computing and machine learning. And actually, I want to kind of get into the ground floor. So I went and started doing my AWS certification. Reason being, going back to those principles, meta learning, I was following a syllabus, so I had a map. I didn't have to go and generate it myself. Focus, I do 30 minutes a night around 7:30. Directness and drill. I watch videos. I did exam. I practice on AWS. That's the stuff that I actually wanted to do, right? Retrieval. What I would do is I'd write down notes after I'd done a video and try to remember that, the stuff that I'd done. Feedback was really simple. I'm doing certification. Mock exams make utter sense. This is what they kind of teach us in school. And, and then retention intuition is about watching videos, bringing them in my mind into things that I already understood and knew about. Experimentation, the last one was about getting outside your comfort zone, which this is stuff that I've never done before. It's worth pointing out that this is just one learning model. Again, the same with Pat Kewer's, engineering archetypes, the same with this. This is just one of the ones that I found. I actually like Tim Ferriss's learning model as well, which is DSSS. So it's deconstruct the skill, which I think we talked about already, is one of the things that Scott recommends. It's select the pieces, it's sequence the way that you want to learn them, and then it stakes. He's a big believer in putting bets on yourself in terms of trying to motivate yourself. So how did I do? Passed both. I'm happy to say I probably wouldn't be doing this talk if I didn't. But I did better on the machine learning than I did the architectural space. And why was that? I think I did the architectural exam first, and I did the machine learning one second. I believe I got into better habits from the first time to the second time. So I carried those on. And actually, I spent a lot of time getting a lot more feedback than I did from the first one to the second one. And actually, I think it just drove the kind of, the improvement rate. It was probably something like 70-80% success compared to about like 90-95 in the second part, just because of the tweaks that I made. And obviously, everyone's very well aware of build, measure, and learn. So, okay, talking about the good habits I got into, this is my kind of third suggestion of skill. Habit creation. So this is something that I use in work quite a lot, both to analyze my own behavior and other people's. You've probably heard of the kind of basic skill versus will before. So as you can probably see, ability is skill, will is motivation, and then the nice orange line is what is known by BJ Fogg as the action line. So above the line, a prompt will trigger a behavior. Below a prompt will not. So let's work this out. If it's easy to do and you've got high motivation and something tells you to do it, you're going to do it. Vice versa, if it's hard to do and you're not interested and no one tells you to do it, it's going to fail. It's kind of as simple as that. The algorithm there is in the top right corner. B equals MA. It's actually P, not T in the book. Its behavior is equal to the motivation times your ability to do it times the prompt. T here, I think, stands for time. But, when I found this, I thought, actually, it still looks the same anyway. So how do I use this? So when I'm tracking and thinking about my own habits, why I'm doing things, I think about that algorithm and I say, actually, why aren't I doing that behavior? What are the issues? And I do that same with the team. When I need the team to do something, I come at it from this approach. I'm like, actually, what prompts have I given them? How have I developed their ability to do it? Motivation is a far more tricky customer. And to be fair, I'm not a psychologist. It's probably, I don't play one on the internet, even though I probably play one a little bit now. And it's probably beyond the scope of what I truly know to talk about altering that. But I think it's about resonating with people, which is why I tend to find stuff like OKRs and common goals with the why, allowing people to create their own route raises motivation. But it's also worth calling out, in terms of habit creation, if motivation was the number one factor, nobody says that they want to be, eat worse or exercise less or read less or everything. Everyone's very motivated to develop their own habits and their behaviors. So, my belief is to stick to the prompts and the abilities. Again, one behavior model. If you want another one, James Clear's there. He wrote the book Atomic Habits that I would really recommend. He talks about cue, craving, response, reward. He talks about making the cue really obvious, which is the prompt. He talks about making the craving attractive, which is motivating. He talks about the response being easy, which is ability. And he talks about the reward being satisfying, as in that ties back to the motivation. So again, I would also say this is for both good and bad things. Think about these things. So, make your prompt if you want to do it. If you don't want to do it, how do you remove your prompt? How do you make it harder to do that behavior, and move the ability? And then you think about it in this model and this line, and actually it becomes really easy to be able to drive and talk about things. So, people are probably sitting there thinking, right, this guy's telling us a lot of stuff that's probably not hanging together in any kind of thread. So I've probably wasted most of my lunch. So hopefully this slide's going to start to bring us together. So let's put it all together. So what have I talked about here? I've given you a map. We're talking about ultra learning, about what to do, what destination, engineering leadership, what engineering leaders can work with. So, the next part is I've given you a framework, either ultra learning or DSSS one, which is Tim Ferriss, to go chase those skills. And I've also given you a little bit about habit formation and habit frameworks, which will let you rise above your wavering motivation. Remember that behavior is motivation times ability times prompt. And if you're 1% better each day or 1% worse each day, it gives you big gains either up or down, depending on which way you the framework. So use this for both your team and yourself to help drive the behaviors you want. It's fair to me that I never really had this view going forward. I think unknowingly made the right moves at the right time, which brought some of these things together for me. I developed an interest in teams and leadership. I got excited about the full end-to-end software process, and I've stayed enough interested on the tech side that has allowed me to enter a stage in my career where expanding away from just focusing on QA was quite natural for me. It's also worth noticing that the industry's changed as well. The advent of product delivery teams, agile, meaning the backgrounds of all types of kind of engineers are more accessible for senior figures. 30 years ago, again, maybe talking out of turn, but my belief would have been it was a strong background from kind of, the development technical side that would have won the day. Again, Steve Jobs, I think, said his Stanford graduation in 2005 when he, gave his commencement, it's really famous. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking back. And actually, it was us doing some of this stuff that made me think, actually, those things fell into place at the right time. It wasn't particularly me, driving or leading some of this stuff. So let's look back to the start. So what did I say I was going to tell you? I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about different types of engineering leadership. Check. I was also going to promise to bring you principles that you could apply to your own career, backed up examples from my own career. And I think it's also worth, saying tick on that as well. But like all good kind of consultants or techies, I'm going to under promise, I'm going to over deliver. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you some bonus tips. So be prepared, aka start now. So I was in a position to take over as a head of engineering because I was already prepared for it. I was thinking upstream. I was acting like an engineering manager already. Without that experience at the time, that role could have became available and they could have said, actually, Chris, we've never seen you do any of these things. But I'd already done that, which meant it was quite an easy play to move me in. Think small. So pick one project, pick one team, one whatever, to start with. Don't assume you're going to go in tomorrow and just change the world if you're going to start preparing. It just won't work like that. And then there's another tip called the ringleader versus ninja. So you can be really overt about what you're doing and take people on the journey, which is how I did it. Or you can be really covert like a ninja. And there's pros and cons to both. You could get pushback or whatever, but just be aware that you can do it both ways. So, last slide. I think I promised you guys a key resources slide. Here we are. So I saw Pat at QCon this year. His blog Level Up. I would definitely, his mailing list Level Up gets sent out once on a Sunday. I would recommend signing up for that. It's full of really good curated content. He writes really good stuff. He gets really good stuff. I think it's really epic. I talk about ultra learning here. Scott Young. It's quite a decent book around developing skills. Again, I could recommend the Tim Ferriss stuff. I've mentioned Tim Ferriss at the bottom. I recommend all of his stuff. The book that he talks most about his skill acquisition method is The 4-Hour Chef. If people are looking for that, it's quite a weighty tome actually, but most of it's a cookbook if people are interested in cooking as well. And he talks about how he learned to cook. That was quite cool. Atomic Habits or Tiny Habits by James Clear or BJ Fogg. That's the habit formation stuff. Yeah, I would recommend either of those. Don't buy them both. We can buy them both. I read both, but I'd recommend one. And like I said, I'm a massive believer in that books are worth more than blogs. But I think all of these guys, Tim certainly does, James certainly does, Pat obviously has, blogs and newsletters that I would recommend. James Clear's newsletter is brilliant. Because most wisdom on the web or something in certain things. And that's it really. So thanks for attending my talk. Feel free to reach out to me at ChrisThacker66 at Twitter. Reach out to me on email, chris.thacker@moneysupermarket.com. Any kind of questions, feedback. But I've got plenty of time now. If people want to ask me any questions, go for it.
Well, thanks for that. That was really good. Great to see you in such a flow.
Sorry, I'm a really fast talker naturally. Sorry, that's just me.
It's okay. Lots of great things to take away from that. And I know obviously you said about consistency over intensity, which is something I'm a huge believer in as well. I mean, you can apply that to just about every part of your life and just get 1% better every day. I mean, does anyone have any immediate questions that they'd like to put forward to Chris?
I have a question for Chris, and I'm sure Chris would be surprised because a question's coming from me.
No, I'm not whatsoever, Phil.
For those people that don't know, I used to work for Chris, and Chris was always the one that would always nudge me and go, "You've got a question, Phil, go and ask it." So it's quite funny. So, okay, Chris, obviously I've taken the mickey out of you before because I know you're quite famous for wearing shorts and things. But on the back of that, what I wanted to ask was, have you had to either overcome prejudices or had to alter or adopt new behaviours in order to achieve the positions you have?
Yes and no, possibly. So I definitely think there are people who see the short and think this guy's a bit of a joker or clown. And obviously, Phil, you've worked with me, I'm probably more quick with the jokes than wisdom sometimes. So there's definitely been kind of feedback or conversation where you think, actually, how do I do that better or how do I do it? But actually, I still wear the shorts most days. I still tuck them in. It's a part of me. And what I've always kind of said is that, being promoted or changing my role and changing who I am doesn't sit well with me. So actually, it's it doesn't detract from me. I think actually it's been something that, people remember or they stand out about me. So actually, I probably softened certain things, but, you're never going to see me probably rocking the suit, if I'm honest with you. So the shorts are just who I am, for instance. So there's definitely been softening of certain things. But actually, I think there's only so far you can take what I call the spectrum. Do you know what I mean? I'm never going to go super professional or super formal. And likewise, it's about actually just coming nicely down there. So there's definitely been thoughts about how I've done that. But, the main underlying things that they won't change.
That's great. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no problem.
Has anyone else got any, as I say, initial questions just based on the back of the talk?
Yeah, so I'm a software engineering test, so kind of have that developer and tester mindset, but also very interested in sort of infrastructure and architecture. How much do you think, because you were talking about the sort of union of different skills, how well does actually understanding all the different facets of the engineering process really aid you in being able to do your head of engineering role?
I think it's really helpful, if I'm being honest with you. So I think the more stuff that you're aware of, and this sounds harsh, but even at a general level, that you can say, actually, I might not know the answer to that stuff, but I've seen it or I could understand it and go and get it. Google's democratized knowledge, if I'm being honest with you, but actually the ability to go and find that knowledge and be aware of it, it's you'll have less unknown unknowns or unknown things, quantities. And even if you can't say I've never done this before, but I know it's a thing you can do, actually having that really kind of big breadth, I think is really, really useful and really handy. So in my role and in the roles that I've done in having that kind of, it's an architectural infrastructure testing of it, somebody who's been in all of those things and or has knowledge of all those things is really, really, really helpful. I think there's a school of thought at the minute around, generalists are better than specialists. And I think you can argue it from both ways. But actually, generalists. You want to mix of both. So that, I don't think it's something I would say not to get down to, and there's obviously the concept of T-shaped people, etc., etc. I just think it's about being in the right place at the right time. But no, I wouldn't push back about being a generalist, to be honest with you, in my view, because I think the further and higher up in an organisation you go, the more generalist you need to be. Like a CEO of a business, as example, could be the world's best marketer, but actually they need to be aware of how tech operates and how finance operates and stuff. And actually, that was one of the reasons that I moved more into the engineering space, because you can only go so far as a tester or as a developer or as an architect, because you need to then become more general the higher up business you go. So I think it's key.
Cool.
Hi, Chris. I've got a question.
Yeah.
Congratulations on your role, anyway.
Cheers. Thank you.
Do you find, so having, I feel as though I would be slightly biased towards testing and QA. I've worked in that arena for so many years. Do you find yourself leaning towards that biased slightly?
Yeah, you know what? Possibly I do sometimes. I won't deny that, but I think it's about catching it. So, I said before about the cues and catching it in that prompt and say, actually, am I being fair here? And sometimes, you probably overcorrect and you go the opposite way. But also there tends to be, and maybe I'm lucky because of the QA background, there's less QAs than there are developers, so you can kind of have 6 people in one area and 1 in the other area, so actually it kind of matches out anyway. But yeah, I probably do lead from a testing lens quite more often than I should, but actually trying to catch that natural bias and think, I'm aware of it, actually ask some questions about this stuff or think about this. So it's just catching myself is the big thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem.
So Hemi has put a question down in the chat bar. Any thoughts about the engineering roles that you mentioned fitting into the head of DevOps roles, which might demand more tech skills?
Again, so I suppose when you get to the head of DevOps or you get to the head of anything, right? It's how much of this is kind of say leadership, management of people and being able to apply critical thinking to what they have. As opposed to being the person who's like, right, we're going to make this decision. I'm going to do this. I'm going to drive that. I'm known for my bad sports analogies, but as a football manager, you're not getting out on the pitch and generating the play yourself, but actually you're putting people in the position to win. And I think the same, as the head of testing, head of DevOps and stuff, it's good to have that knowledge. And I think you would need to have, if you don't know what the cloud is, you don't know how like networking works and stuff, you're going to be a little bit broken. But actually, you're looking at this is the general things we should be doing. Actually, the specifics, here's you go and do it. You get a lot more buy-in that way. And the flip side, like I think I mentioned in my talk, is that if you give me a testing problem, I'll probably tell you how to test it, which actually isn't great. It can become very kind of task delegation as opposed to delegating the outcome, which not having that background and skill set, I think just leads to better better buy-in from the team themselves. So I think it's about knowing and building. That's why I talked about the ultra learning. So it's definitely about getting an understanding. For instance, I think of a really good or bad example off the fly now about something like you probably wouldn't want to stick me in charge of a hospital or an operating theatre. I don't claim to be someone who can just step into any arena, but actually could I organise surgeons so that they know which operating theatres to use? Yeah, of course I could. So I think it's about knowing where on that line you want to be.
And Maria has also asked as well, I appreciate you might not be best placed to answer this, but what management career paths are also possible for QA people aside from engineering leadership?
There's loads, to be honest with you. I'll come off the screen share so I can see the questions. Product's an easy one, right, straight away. So, if you're a subject matter expert in what you're doing, what you're testing, actually, why would you not move into products? People, we still have delivery managers, delivery leads, that kind of conversation. You can move into delivery, which is just pure play, that kind of thing. There should be nothing. We talk in our business at the minute about squiggly careers, about going sideways and stuff and actually moving into that thing. And I think testing, it gives you that ability to think critically, time manage, etc. The kind of core meta skills that you can move across, public speaking, liaising with stakeholders and stuff. So there's nothing that I think shouldn't be out of the context of, of a tester moving into, and vice versa. Do you know what I mean? Like somebody who's been in the ops space or somebody who's been in the dev space. I think, you bring what you've got, there's always transfer learning. and then use that in the way you see fit. And the one thing I always think when I change any kind of job is that what made you successful in the one before doesn't make you successful at this one. So it's about understanding what are the rhythms and rituals that you should be following to be successful at that job. So that's the kind of key call that I would always do.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, obviously seeing lots of CVs, seeing the career paths that people often take. Product is one that I see a lot, especially in sort of SMEs, as well as sort of dual Scrum Master and then moving into delivery roles as well. So yeah, that's often something I pick up on. Has anyone else got any questions that they'd like to put forward? No worries if not. Chris obviously said that his inbox is always open if you do have any. So feel free to reach out to him or me if you do have any more questions. But thank you all for attending. It's it's been a very interesting session today, as I'm sure you'll all agree, and I'm sure you'll all agree that take something away from this. No refunds will be handed out, unfortunately. So yeah, if anyone in the interim, in the meanwhile, until next week's session, where we'll be having Fiona actually doing a talk on manual testing and the lost art of exploratory testing. If anyone needs any CV advice or application help or assistance in anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. And as I say, Chris's inbox is always open as well if you do have any other questions. So yeah, thank you all for attending. Big thank you for Chris for the talk and making time for it. And take care and hopefully speak to you soon.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Chris. That was awesome.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Christy.
Cheers, Phil.